Welcome to the Modern Mythos Podcast, a show dedicated to the keepers and players of Call of Cthulhu and other investigative horror games. I'm John Hook.
And I'm Seth Skorkowski, and together we'll discuss writing, game mastering, and player tips and how you can apply them to your table. Today we'll discuss how to create atmosphere in your horror game, and then reflect on the recently concluded Chaosium Con, which John and I just got back from.
Yeah, that was awesome.
That was great.
So much fun. And I'm itching to talk about it, but I think first, let's talk about atmosphere, horror atmosphere at your table.
Wow, this is one of the topics that actually really does interest me, mostly because I came from the original dungeon crawling, and then when we started doing theme games, this is all stuff I had to learn the hard way, mostly by narrowing down what actually worked and getting rid of all the bad stuff that didn't. So hopefully, someone might be able to avoid that level of the learning curve.
And hopefully, we can give some advice on how to use some of these tools to their best ability. I purposely say to the best ability because, the first thing that most people think about or say, or their response when you talk about, hey, how do you bring atmosphere to your table, is they talk about music. And music is, in my opinion, the most misused tool, because they just will put like a playlist on and just let it run in the background. But that playlist left unchecked, it can't predict the rise and fall of emotions at the table. And so more often than not, your music, if it's just left unchecked, is going to feel out of place. It's not going to be punctuating the emotions and the atmosphere of the table at the right time. So we have a few tips on how you can use music to the best ability.
No, and I totally agree, because I've done the music gag for different types of games, and it always is when you're selecting your tracks, because I would curate my playlist, because before you had all the things where you could just get it all, stream it online, and you'd always kind of picture like, oh man, this song would be great for this scene or whatnot. And what you don't really think about is that song is 3 minutes, maybe 7 if it's off some soundtrack somewhere.
If it's
And yeah, and well, if it was like the Lord of the Rings songs, and you're doing like
right,
D&D or whatnot.
yeah.
The problem is, you picture in your head that combat or that scene is only going to take 5 minutes, whatever the length of that song is. No, it's like 30, and so yeah, you're right.
Yep.
It never really works out. Or when the game suddenly has a quick change in mood or location, the playlist doesn't know that. I always have done multiple playlists. So like with Call of Cthulhu, I had like About Town, and it was just literally jazz. And then I had the creepy you're in the haunted house sort of thing. And then I had combat, and those were my 3. But I think a lot of people, they only think of doing one, and it's like, no, you need to change it depending on what the mood is. I don't want it to be a calm scene, all of a sudden my combat playlist starts playing, or vice versa. So there is a little bit more than you just simply put on music and then step away. It actually does require a few steps, and that then can start distracting you from the game as your keeper starts suddenly being a DJ and selecting the perfect track at the perfect moment. And I've never seen that. I've had the urge when I've finally had that technology, but I've heard a lot of stories of like game masters that would obsess about the perfect music at every single moment, that the game started suffering because the GM's like scrolling their phone. And
yeah, I have going off topic here, off script a little bit. I have written one. It was actually a Swords and Wizardry fantasy adventure. I wrote one of those that I purposely named music to use, and it was because I had also written twisted lyrics to go with it. And so I was the music was the Trans-Siberian Orchestra's Christmas at Sarajevo, or Sarajevo Christmas Eve, something like that. I forgot the name of the song, but it does, that song does have lyrics to it. But in the very beginning of the song, there's a long period of just instrumental, and I actually have notes in the module where the game master is supposed to start the song, and after the first minute of music has played and then a certain crescendo is beginning to rise, that's when the game master is supposed to start reciting these lyrics that I wrote for the song, because it's an evil Christmas
Mhm.
module, and so the game master is supposed to read these lyrics as the song proceeds to go from minute 1 to minute 2 of that, and then once 2 minutes of the song has been played and the game master's recited these lyrics and really kind of set the initial tone, because the characters, literally the characters hear the music filtering through the dungeon as they're playing, but I only have the game master play it the one time as they're descending into the dungeon itself. And then the notes are, go ahead and turn it off, set it aside, and just remind the players that that song is just on repeat throughout the entire time that they're in the dungeon. Then that way they can just kind of focus on the game itself and not have that music with the
No,
pretend lyrics that I wrote, with the faux lyrics that I wrote.
yeah, the thing is, stuff like that I absolutely love, where a specific track or song is intended to be used in a specific moment. Because that's different than the music just kind of playing in the
Yeah.
background. There have been two adventures that I've done in the past few years that did that, and they were absolutely amazing in how that played out. The first one was Pax Cthulhiana by Two
Hmm.
Starving Knolls. It's kind of a system neutral 1920s Call of Cthulhu adventure, and that one has a couple scenes where it's a timer, and yeah, they've only got like 2.5 minutes to do this as the portals are opening and Cthulhu is rising, and they're trying to stop the end of the world. And in the adventure, it talks about, like, one of them was like a song from the movie Interstellar, and then I forgot what the other one was, and it was like, download these songs. We strongly recommend them. You can use your own, blah blah blah. And then when I listened to them, I was like, oh my god, nothing could actually be better than how some of those worked up. And so whenever I ran it, and I was like, okay, now it's time to begin. And there was this clay puzzle they had to put together, and I literally had the puzzles like with a cloth over it, and I hit play and yanked off the cloth. I was like, go. And as that music grew more frantic and louder, it was really affecting them. But it was also the timer, and they knew that. So that was beautiful. The other was the very first cult game I ran, had a scene where the big monster Nephirite shows up, and it had a track from the Hellraiser 2 soundtrack that it said you should play right there, which is absolutely perfect for that game since Hellraiser was one of their big inspirations. It's a very dramatic, lots of brass playing, and that's what that moment needed. But those are ones where you are incorporating at a specific time, and where the keeper or the game master kind of gives like that evil smile and hits play, and watches how that specific song affects them. That is
Nice.
beautiful when it works. One of the other things that I had done is there was and I found them years ago. I couldn't even tell anybody where I got them, but somebody had actually made some mixes. One of like 1920s jazz. They're like these 16-minute playlists. They're really cool. Some of them are kind of catchy, but then they have another one. It's the same songs, but then you've got wind and rain, and at certain times it starts playing backwards, and you've got this. It's
Wow.
twisting, and but it's the exact same music, and so that's what I used, is because I've got like 4 tracks of this is what it sounds like normally, and then as the game got further, I just kind of quietly changed it over, and
Oh my
then
god, that is
and
awesome.
and because they were kind of this mixed where the songs are just kind of blending into each other normally, because it was just meant to be ambience, it wasn't immediately apparent that I had actually switched tracks because it sounded the same, but then wasn't. So
Oh
that
my
was
god.
that was wonderful. Some genius put that together.
That is awesome. That is so awesome. You know, music can be used in a lot of ways. One of the things I think could be really cool, I haven't done this myself yet, but it's something I'm going to start thinking about, is having a piece of music for your big bad, your major villain,
Oh
right?
yeah.
You could use this as a stinger kind of as you're introducing that villain and you're going into a final confrontation, you know?
Oh, it's like the Darth Vader thing.
Yeah. Yeah, he's got his theme.
That
They
theme
they
song.
call it the march, I think, right?
Yeah, and it was like I had mentioned that cult game, like when the big Cinnabite monster shows up, play this song from Hellraiser, they'll get the feeling. And so yeah, if you've got some big bad, it it's kind of neat to have that, or just major NPCs, because you could also have the old man in the wheelchair patron that sometimes gives them those quests, like, I need you to go to Austria to this auction on my behalf, which I've got one of my games. He's sent the characters to the auction. We did that, and then this last month we did the Disintegrator for Pulp Cthulhu. Same character, sent him, same old man. And but yeah, it'd be kind of neat if he had his own little song. And then, if you did something like that, and then later they evolved into the villain, you've already established that this is their song. So then you could actually kind of turn that same track into something that's kind of ominous, of the former friend or trusted person, and that song now means bad things are about to happen to them. One of the ways that I use music, this is actually the first way that I ever effectively use music, is we'd get together for a game, and we'd all just talk and chat and all that stuff. It's like you and I do before we start recording. We spend the first 45 minutes talking
Easy, yeah.
about everything in the world. And so one of the ways that as a game master, I was like, okay, let's start, is I had a song. And it all came down to one day I showed up at a game and I had a certain song absolutely stuck in my head. And so I was at a friend's house. I made him download it, and this is in the days of dial-up, man. So it was like, could you do this for the next 20 minutes? Download this one specific track on your dial-up, and it was we were doing a D&D game, but it was like a Ravenloft-esque world, and it was a Bullet with Butterfly Wings that we would play. It kind of opens up the world as a vampire. And that campaign went for 2 years. Every single session began with that song.
That is awesome.
It was kind of the way of like, it was almost the gavel drop of like, okay, chat time is over. The game begins now. And it was like, when you're watching like a good TV show, and like that theme song comes on and you're kind of getting excited as you're watching it. When we did Two-Headed Serpent, I always opened it with the theme song from Tales of the Golden Monkey,
Nice.
because it's kind of an Indiana Jones knockoff, so it hits a lot of those same beats, but it's not the Indiana Jones song, because then I didn't want them to think of Indiana Jones, but I wanted to get that exact ambiance of it. So
Mhm.
every session in that began with that, little, whatever the length of the opening credits of Tales of the Golden Monkey was, so it was like a 2-minute song. And that's a really effective tool to kind of signal we begin.
I like that idea a lot. There can be a problem though with music, especially if you just do have it running, is volume. So it's important to remember, just if it's not something that the players should be expressly paying attention to, if it is just going to be in the background, have it low enough so that everyone can hear each other speaking at the table.
Yeah, and the thing is, I very often when I've used music, because I still use it pretty regularly, but I am always turning it down lower, because when I set it up, I'm alone. My players haven't arrived yet, so I set it at this volume that's kind of comfortable for being in a quiet room, and the music is the only sound. But once you adjust two people are trying to talk, the music actually needs to be lower. That way they don't have to talk above it. And this is an issue that I always have in restaurants that have music. Like you go to a restaurant to chat with somebody, and that music is just that way too loud. It might not actually be that loud, but everyone in the restaurant now has to talk above it. So the whole restaurant's kind of roaring, and now you're almost yelling across the table to your friend, or that person that's further down the table has no idea what the other side of the table is talking about, even though it's not a big table. And it's because whenever they set the volume on the music system in the restaurant, it was probably an empty restaurant at the time. And whoever was setting the volume was like, "Yeah, I'd like the place to be about this loud. That's a good volume," not taking into account the voices adding to that of just all the people. So if you do have music in your game, if any player ever has difficulty hearing what's going on, the music is now diminishing the experience. So usually with my music, my players don't always even notice it's playing until we hit a lull, and then it's very soft in the background, and I'll turn it up if we enter like some big combat or something. But usually
Yeah.
it's just very subtle.
Yeah, it
The
can fill the spaces when it gets quiet.
And the other thing that I love is ambience tracks. Those are wonderful. When I ran the Derelict, I think it was the first time I ever really used one, and that's on a ship that's on an iceberg. And I found some weird YouTube ASMR video of like 10 hours aboard an icebreaker. And it's literally just the thrum of engines and the wind and just this very low rumbling, and I just played that the whole time, very very slowly and or lightly in the background. And there's a lot of different programs out there, like Sirenscape or whatnot, where you
Hmm.
go into a town and you can play these tracks, and it's usually kind of like conversations that you only get a little piece of, or you can't even make out the words, and like the tinging of a
Right.
blacksmith's hammer, the
Yeah. The murmur
hooves.
of a tavern, the rain in a forest, that kind of thing.
And I like those once again, as long as it's not so loud that it's diminishing. And the problem with Sirenscape that I found is I do have the urge to tinker and do the DJ thing, and all of a sudden the game's suffering because I'm like, oh, I got a perfect one for this, and my players are like, hey, Seth, are we here to play, or are you just gonna just make little noises out of your magic music box there? So, but I think that's a cool program, and I like that as a good alternate to music. It's just that background noise of ambience, but once again, as long as it never detracts, because it's a really fine line, and I think a lot of people that are new to it don't know about it's a fine line.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Something that I try to bring to the table when I'm playing is with each scene, I try to be as descriptive as I can. I feel like for me, language can really set the tone and set the mood if used right. If you describe things in a certain way. And I think it just depends upon your mindset. You have to have a couple things in mind as you're doing room descriptions or scene descriptions. For one, think about the player's point of view. When they're entering into a scene, how are they coming in? Are they coming in, you know, I'm going to think of it as just D&D because that's simple, but as you're entering into a room, are you entering in from the south door or did they enter from the north door? What can they see immediately as they're entering that entrance? It's different if you're entering from a door and there's a clutter of furniture, pushed up against that end of the room versus the other side where a bunch of villains are gathered, ready to fight. It all depends upon what are you seeing as you come into the room.
Oh yeah. Well, and not just what they see, but there's so much more. You've got your senses, your sight, smell, all of that. A big one of the most important writing tricks that I did get very early on when I started writing is that in any scene you should use a minimum of 3 senses. Just, it is cold. So you get the, feel, or the air is damp. So you've got a tactile sensation, and then the smell, what you see, what you hear. But 3 is kind of the minimum that a lot of writers use just to paint a scene. So do that. But there's also the other sense of the mood of a place, such as if they enter the bar or the party and there is a tension in the air, or the subtle things about the mood of the things that are there, that that's really valuable to kind of paint that scene in their head of what it is their characters are experiencing, without having to slowly bring it out to the point that they're like, can we get back to playing? So if you can just actually really talk about, there's a kind of a tension there, things are weird, and keep going, because you don't want to spend too much time describing the room to the point they start phasing out. You've only got a couple sentences that you can get in, and then
Right. Yeah.
and then their minds start wandering, or now they're just waiting for their chance to talk. So you want to actually kind of like throw that in really quickly, but make sure that each sentence you say helps that, and then step back and give them the stage. Because if you take too long, they're not going to hear half of it. They're already going to be thinking about something else.
Right. Also, you can use, when you're describing the senses, sometimes what's unexpected can be something that they can hold on to. This last weekend at Chaosium Con, I was running a scenario, and this character found a jar, and they could tell that this ancient jar that had been sealed for thousands of years, that as they shook it lightly, it was glooping. They could tell there was some sort of liquid on the inside, but something thicker than water just from the gloop. And then as they got the seal off of it and started to pour it out, and it had a dark honey color to it. And then one of the players asked, "What does it smell like?" They weren't expecting it to smell like jasmine, right? It went against what their expectations were, and it made it even more of a mystery to them. So use the senses, and especially if you can go against expectations, it will make it that much more interesting.
Right. And you actually had a really good one. That example you gave, when describing smells, compare it to something they're familiar with. A lot of times people say, "Oh, it smells foul. It smells, sweet." Okay, yes, those are definite words. But if you say it smells like jasmine, and so smell is the sense that is actually the closest associated with memory, and because of that, it's the closest that inspires an emotional reaction, such as the smell of your father's cologne, or something like that. Actually pulls memories, which pulls an emotion. So if you're trying to get a certain emotion through a smell, don't just say like, "Oh, he's it's kind of a musky smell." Like, no, just give a comparison, and that actually cements it harder in their mind.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, if it is a musky smell, you can say the word musky, but say it has this musky smell like that of your father's t-shirts when you were growing up, and then you instantly think about, that, dad fixing his car, and coming away from it in the middle of the summer, hot and sweaty. If you want to
It smells like
use,
a locker room.
yeah,
Like we
yeah,
all know it, even if we've never been in the same locker room as each other. That smell.
yeah.
uh,
you
or wet
you can
dog.
say foul, but foul isn't descriptive. Is it foul like rotten eggs? Is it foul like old fish? Or is it foul like acidic vomit? All of those have a different smell and paint a different picture, but they're all foul, you
Yeah,
know?
and I said they'll pull an emotion or reaction associated with the memory to it. So that's another really good writer's trick, and you can drop that in without taking more time, because you could say it smells like this. Just that conveys more than if you went through all the descriptors to get to it. And one thing though, just to go back, when you're talking about when you're entering a room, you kind of want to really just give the perspective of where they're coming from, because they're not going to be able to see the whole thing at once, and you want to kind of reveal it as they go deeper in. If if there is something that's important, like your key feature, it could be your monster. So if you go into the temple, and there is your deep one high priest standing in the middle of the room. Once you mention the deep one, your players will not hear another thing you say after that.
Yep.
So I like to kind of almost go, inward toward it. And it's like, oh, okay, there's all these pillars here, and there's these tapestries, and these candles that are smoky tallow, made with the fat of kidnapped children, and just kind of work your way in, and then you go. Then there's a deep one high priest, wearing a weird looking pope hat, and that's kind of like the climax to it. But if you always say there's a deep one high priest, and then there's all this other stuff, they're not paying attention to you. They're not going to remember any of that. So whatever the key feature is, such as the glowing gem that they're trying to get in order to free the princess or whatnot, it's in the treasure room. Mention that last, and think about in a movie when the characters do enter the treasure room, and you kind of have that long pan across all the gold and all that, and then the camera slowly rises to the important thing, and then you get the reaction shot of the heroes. That's what you're doing, and your description is the camera panning through that scene. But if you start with the big one first, everything else might as well not exist.
Exactly. I was going to say something I employed also during this last weekend at Chaosium Con 2022. More on that later. In a scene with where there were multiple characters, multiple players encountering the same thing, I thought it would be fun to play upon the fact that not every person will see the same thing and see it in the same way, right? Witnesses in car accidents are notoriously unreliable because if you've got 5 witnesses to one car accident, they all saw something different in subtle ways. They all saw something different. And so you can, especially in the game of Call of Cthulhu, you can use this to your ability to kind of ratchet up paranoia and tension. In the scene that I used it, 2 characters were inspecting and looking at a pair of coffins that were open, and there were 2 mummies in each of these coffins, one in each. So one of the 2 characters, when he did his spot hidden roll, he failed his spot hidden roll. So instead of just simply saying, you don't really see anything, or there was nothing for you to see or notice, I say, well, you don't really notice anything, but as you start to look away out of the corner of your eye, you see the head of the mummy turn slightly towards you. Or in another scene, as he was trying to walk away, the milky white eye, rolled slightly towards into his direction, just barely noticeable, and only to that one character. He was the only character that thought he saw these things moving, and he was really freaked out. He spent a long time with his weapon trained on that thing, waiting for it to animate, which it never did.
Oh my
So
god, dude, I am blown away. I have never considered the failed spot in the creepy situation, meaning you thought you saw something like that, because we've all been there.
yeah,
It's late at night, you're walking through the house, or you thought you heard something,
oh
and you're
yeah,
like, is the door open? Is someone here? Is this, so you're scared out of your mind because your mind is playing tricks on you. uh, oh wow. The whole
to
time we're
this
talking,
day,
I was
yeah.
like, this grin is going across my face. Like, yeah, viewers do not know how much my eyes are lighting up as you're telling me
To
this.
this day, I'm 54 years old. To this day, I still remember a nightmare I had when my brother and I were still young enough that we were sharing a bedroom, and we had bunk beds, and I was in the top bunk. And I think I must have watched something scary or something that night. And I went to bed and I was convinced, with my eyes wide open, I was convinced I could see in the shadows at the foot of my bed a skeleton climbing up the end of the bunk bed and trying to crawl up onto the mattress with me and grab at my feet or whatever. I was scared shitless. And it took me quite a while for me to finally fall asleep. It was one of those things like, if you don't move, apparently skeletons have the same vision as T-Rexes. If you don't
Mhm.
move, they lose you, right? So
Oh,
yeah, I sat there still, not moving, totally quiet until I think I just passed out. But I was convinced there was a skeleton coming. So people can see things, you know?
no, I love that of the thing. So I was taking when you're bringing that up as far as, and this does require that a keeper have a decent knowledge of what skills characters have, because yeah, if you've got like six players and they've all got the huge skill lists, you don't always remember what all they have. You usually have a good idea of who's better at what. Your character that's got the higher listen is probably the one you actually want to give the most audio cues to of painting a scene. This isn't anything they roll for. They would just naturally be the one that you would probably use the most audio descriptors toward. And or if your character is one of the characters is schooled in, so let's say archaeology, and you're in a museum, you would actually bring up the artifacts more with them. No skill roll required. It's just you describing the room they're in. You would probably want to focus more of those descriptions for each character based off the skills that that character is good at. Now, the other players are sitting on the table, they're going to hear it, but I like the idea of, your character, who I know has a listen that's, 65, this is what you hear. The air conditioner running, or different things like that. Well, the one that's got the really good spot, which is basically all the other senses, you could give the visuals to, or if they are educated in medicine or history or something like that, you actually kind of focus on those things that they're good at. And that's a really cool way of tailoring the description for what that character would actually be most inclined to notice.
I totally agree. And you can kind of get a little bit of that also from the characters, and specifically I'm talking Call of Cthulhu, from the character's occupation. So if there's a medical character, whether it's a doctor, a nurse, a psychiatrist, you could really kind of describe how the mood of the room is. People are nervous. People seem to be shifting, shuffling their feet, darting their eyes. If it's an archaeologist, absolutely, they zero in on, like you said, they see all these different artifacts and are immediately kind of like, ticking boxes on what they should be taking a look at, or cataloging. Our group had a cat burglar in it, which was awesome. That the player was constantly looking to see what they could fence, see what they could fit in their pockets, what's small and what can I take away and have it appraised and sold. So it was, they always wanted me to describe, hey, is there anything small and shiny in here, right? So it was nice that the players were kind of taking lead on that and asking for those kind of descriptors.
That's always wonderful because you've got 50 things going through your head, and you forget that. So if the player kind of gives you that little gentle prod, well, if this is what I would pay attention to, and I was like, oh yeah, thank you. That's I'm going to do this, and now it reminds me to do that to everyone else. And one other thing, which is just as important as the words that you say, is how you say them. And that's one of the things that separates it, from reading a story, is how do you use your voice. If you've got a scene that's in a library, not just the conversations they have with NPCs, lower your voice because we're in somewhere you should be quiet. Or if you're in a setting like you're in a bar, you'd probably want to raise your voice, even when you're just describing the stuff around, because that actually kind of conveys that feeling of it. And that doesn't take any more time. You just kind of use your voice to kind of convey the mood of what this scene is. And that's very good. One thing, and an absolute master at this, and I've ripped it off, and my players have all responded well to it because they've noticed it after I've pointed it out. Is Scott Dorward, and I've played a
Hmm.
few games with him, mostly with the How We Roll podcast crew, and um, they are very difficult to keep focused. Man, we spend most of those sessions just laughing our butts off, and then they have to like edit that out. But so Scott is an absolute master at whenever the something creepy happens, or there's the reveal of the mythos is coming out. He'll start by talking normal, and then very subtly he starts talking quieter and quieter. And so all of a sudden you're kind of straining to hear as he's describing like oh, there's a boil on his arm, and you see this movement inside of it, and it's something's inside of it, right? And I like he's just getting into it, and all of a sudden all of our laughing and cutting up ends as he's kind of leading us down this kind of really weird, creepy scene. And then at the end, like an afterthought, is like, could you give me a sanity, please? And it's like, oh no, crap, holy shit! It's just, but it's just a very subtle way he uses his voice that he can make something that that horror moment 1,000 times more effective, while also wrangling a bunch of monkeys who are too busy telling jokes to each other to really focus on the mood, to just get us straight into that mood. And
Oh, everyone is leaning into the campfire to listen to him speak. Yeah.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
he
Tone of
is.
voice is awesome. Using that is great.
And if I had ever done that before, it was by accident. It was never really intentional until I played under him, and he did that test a few times. And I was like, damn, that works so good. And I used it on my players, and it worked absolutely flawlessly. So I do highly recommend that.
Something else I think can work, and I know some people will feel silly with it, but I actually think doing accents, having voices for your NPCs is a really effective way to set tone, set atmosphere, and really pulls your players into the storyline. Sometimes it can be used for comedic effect, and that's great. You want your horror games to have that rise and fall of a roller coaster, because when you have that rise of comedy, when the fall of horror occurs, it makes that drop even more dramatic. You can't have everything super low where there's no other place to drop for the horror, because you can't maintain that, and it won't be scary for anyone. So you really need a rise and fall, and that can be facilitated with voices. I in my Tomb of Doom scenario that I ran this last weekend, one of the NPCs is a French archaeologist, and I did my absolute worst French accent, but it got people, laughing and into the mood. And then as the horrors came, they were like, "Oh God, this is horrible," So,
Well, it's also such a spectacular way of differentiating NPCs.
mhm.
So not that we don't always have a completely unique miniature or icon that we could use for them, or if we're doing like straight theater of the mind. So a good way to differentiate NPCs is voices. And a lot of people aren't good at accents. I actually usually do bad impersonations. I'm not good at accents, but what I'm good at is an impersonation of someone who might have that accent. And my impersonations are often so bad you don't know who I'm impersonating. So they think I'm a genius. But one of the other key things there is key phrases that they might say,
Mm-hmm.
such as this is a person who says obviously, all the time. And all of a sudden they start associating with like some word or some uh, little quirk or catchphrase. And it doesn't have to be like long. It could just be this character likes using this word a lot. And when you're kind of making your notes, I love the way that Call of Cthulhu does the dramatis personae, where it's like the uh, Mary Smith frightened law student or whatever. And it always gives a little descriptor. It's not that hard to put in that word next to it. Whenever you can slip that in, you kind of do that. And that's a very short note you can make to yourself. But it it's a good way of conveying who a character is, even if you aren't the best at giving them a unique accent. Because a lot of times when I try to do an accent, it sounds like I'm trying to make it funny, but
Mm-hmm.
that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a hard time to do accents or impersonations in a straight manner. So I will usually try and play it for comedic effect, and then I just give it up, later as I'm trying to get more into a serious, try to invoke a scary mood at the table. But again, yeah, I think using voices and accents, if impersonations, if at all possible, will help pull your players in.
And it's a good, if you listen to a lot of audiobooks, like I do. A lot of times it's like, oh, I like that voice that they do, and so I actually will. A lot of my NPC voices will sound a lot like characters from whatever audiobook I might just happen to be listening to at that time,
Nice, nice,
just because I've already kind of got in my head how someone would talk differently.
nice.
Now, another one, when you brought up music, that is almost always the first thing that people bring up is lighting. So we're going to do our game. We're going to turn the lights down low and make it dark and get that ambience. And you've also got games like 10 Candles, where that literally is part of the
Yep,
game. Now, once again, it's kind of like with the music. It is absolutely effective until it's not, and it begins detracting from the game, because in a game like Call of Cthulhu, you've got to read all your skill lists and everything. You don't want it to be so low that they're not able to read their dice, or they're not able to read their character sheet. So you do need enough light for that. That's why glow in the dark dice have always seemed weird to me, because like, who the hell is playing in straight black? And then I remember, like, oh, black lights. I mean, I could see that working in some games if you're using black lights, like a cyberpunk game or some weird alien
sure.
spaceship that you're on. Like, okay, we're gonna put on black lights, and now our eyes are gonna look weird, and Tom's glow in the dark dice that he's been proud of all of a sudden are glowing, and that's cool. But other than that, I don't know why they're so popular, other than just a conversation piece. But yeah, so you can always use candles. I like electric candles. Mostly it's because I am personally clumsy as hell, and I know that I'm going to just knock a piece of paper the wrong way, or I'm going to spill wax everywhere. I'm not as worried about us burning the place down, though that is a risk, as far as just a mess or an accident. So, and then there's, of course, there's the smoke and all that, depending on where you are. But so we use like little electric candles. Like, I went to like a hobby shop, picked up like a packet
Like
of
those little
8.
tea lights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we did Edge of Darkness, and I had it where they actually had to do the chant to some of the monster in the ring and all that.
Uh-huh.
I turned the lights down very low, and I also had a floor lamp that was like, or just a table lamp, but I put it on the floor. So that way it still had enough light in the room above what just the little tea lights could do, because I needed them to read the chant, and then I needed them to read their character sheet. So I didn't want to plunge them into too much darkness. And that was a beautiful way we did the mood for that scene, which was just the ceremony. But the other problem with candles is, if you are using stuff like tea lights or whatnot, the area directly next to them is actually shrouded in darkness of
Yeah.
the candle. So if you're like, so people are like, oh, we'll get this candle close to me so I can read. It's like, you can't read it all of a sudden because it's too close to the
Yeah.
candle. So you definitely want to take into account stuff like that. So I'm a bigger fan of, if you are going to use them and they're cool, have secondary lights around, because we don't want it to be, we don't want it to actually make it more difficult for them to suddenly go through a combat or something, because they can't see
Yeah.
their dice clearly.
There are also, because I was thinking about that too, with the instead of real candles, using those battery operated tea lights. But have you also seen the standard size light bulbs that mimic an open flame.
Oh yeah, yeah, I've got them
You could use that.
outside my house right
Yeah,
now.
well, you don't have to have them outside your house. You can have those in a lamp in your game room, and turn down all the other lights and just have that firelight kind of bulb,
Yeah.
flickering orange and yellow lighting.
And I still say that you would have a straight light that helps, because if it's only flickering light, oh man, that gets really hard.
Yeah.
To
Any of your friends that have seizures and epileptic seizures, they're gonna go into a fit with that. So, yeah, normal lighting. I'm all in favor of normal lighting. Actually, having weird lighting is my least favorite way to set mood, but I wanted to include it in this because it's a way, right? It's something that some people might do.
Another one is, and this is actually a hell of a lot easier now, with all the smart lights and everything, where you could like control it with your phone.
Yeah,
Of it could be subtle, where as we enter the cold area, the lights start shifting to blue,
yeah,
or as we're entering the gates of hell, they start turning red, or whatnot. Or if you are in the nightclub scene, they changed different colors, different moods. You can dim them, or turn them up when you need to, and that's really cool. I mean, that's a technology that we couldn't have even imagined,
oh,
that long ago. Another cheap and available everywhere,
yep.
because before, it's like, well, if I want to change the lights in the room, I have to get like one of those expensive colored party lights that always gets like so hot, and I'm worried it's going to catch the place on
Yeah.
fire. Or I feel like I've got like a McDonald's heat lamp above us or something weird.
Push that
It's
over
like,
by the drapes. It'll be fine.
say, okay, guys, hold on. Let me pull out this weird lamp and turn it on. It's like, it's got a blue light in it. And now, it's like, now they can just tap their phone, and all of a sudden all the lights in the room start shifting. So, and that's another one that, once again, is subtle. As long as it doesn't detract, it is awesome. It's really cool.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah, smart lighting that's a great way to do that. Something that Call of Cthulhu has excelled at for 40 years are the handouts.
Oh yeah,
Having a physical handout will exponentially set mood more so than just being descriptive, or having just a cheap, photocopy, which having a cheap photocopy is better than nothing, but having a high end prop, whether it's a newspaper article printed on newsprint, a note that looks like it's actually handwritten, anything like that, props are king.
I agree. The newspaper one's a lot harder. My printer can't handle much. So, but I'll often try to Photoshop stuff together. Like I'll make it look like a telegram, and then I'll cut it out so there's no white around it. Another one, I used to use this a lot in D&D, was a lot of people use tea staining, and tea staining is great because I have done the, like, when you find an old map, and I've crumpled it up and flattened it out, and crumpled up and flattened it out, so it's all weathered, but it's still clearly white printer paper, because I did it in the company Xerox machine,
Mm-hmm.
during work. So it's like gleaming white. So people tea stain. That's really effective. I would use a lot of manila envelopes, man. I used the hell out of large manila envelopes, because you can pick up a pack for cheap, but they're larger than standard printer paper. So it doesn't have that familiar 8.5 by 11. It's really thick, and it's that yellow. So I would do a lot of my maps, or like, you find the old riddle that they have to decipher as they're going through the dungeon, or the scrap of the grimoire that they need. I would put that on manila envelope paper. I just take apart a manila envelope and use that. And I think when I did Ravenloft, and one of the key features in that is there's these two letters. There's the letters that the letter that the player characters get, and they start their quest to Ravenloft, and then there's the one they find in a body right after they get there, and it's too late. and the letters are subtly different. Yeah, I went and I picked up like resume paper, that parchment resume paper. So
Hmm.
I did
Yeah.
one of them with that, and that was the one from Strahd, and then the other one I think was from like the real Burgermeister there. And for that, I used the middle envelope paper because it wasn't as nice and it was browner and kind of rougher. And I did it wasn't as clean. And then I went to like a Michael's or somewhere, and I picked up candle or the not candle wax, the sealing wax, like used for like super fancy party invitations to parties I never get invited to, and a couple stamps. So I bought one stamp, and there was like a cool ring that I had. I was like, it's got a seal on it, and it absolutely delighted the players when I talk about this guy walks in the bar and he hands you this letter, and it was I folded it in the old style way because there wasn't an envelope, so I actually kind of folded it differently, then sealed it with the wax with a big seal on it, and they had to break the seal and undo the letter. And then, so I've got the handwriting of a drunk child. I've got some of the worst handwriting on earth. I did terrible in school because I couldn't even read my own notes. I'm notorious, but so I very carefully wrote these out. But I I wrote them with a different handwriting, because one of the things that cool prompts can do is as the adventure goes on, more things can reveal themselves. So if you give somebody the newspaper article and they immediately look at it and they're like, okay, this was the name of the victim and this was one of the thing. And then later on, as they're getting more information and they're going through the investigation, the adventure more, all of a sudden other things in that newspaper article or that handout that you gave them suddenly start becoming very important, stuff that they hadn't noticed. So like in that one, you find the letter and then you find the other. And the fact that one of them I was using kind of a calligraphy style, and the other was a very straight line written out because it was clear. I always hate when they talk about handwriting is different, and you get the prompts, and you're like, I can't really tell the difference between those two handwritings. So it was like one of them was print, the other was script, or kind of flowy, and all of a sudden you do have a clue that you've given that the handwritings are different. And those are cool things, and they absolutely deliver the mood and the ambience like a hammer blow.
Oh yeah, and there are companies out there like the HP Lovecraft Historical Society,
Oh yeah,
HPLHS. They have, I mean, they've won awards for the Masks of Nyarlathotep prompts that they've created. They are just now coming out with prompts that are going to basically support the Kickstarter that Chaosium did last year for the 40th anniversary, kind of reprinting their first and second edition box sets, along with a few supplements that were originally produced for second edition. So that'll be interesting to see how those props, can really bring the game to life.
I'll tell you, man. It actually always drives me nuts when they do that stuff on an adventure I've already run. It's like, you bastards. Like, where were you 2 years ago when I ran this? Like, jerks. I'm always embittered. When we were, kind of like, leaping forward a little, when we were at the con last weekend, Matt McLeod with Lurking Fears ran a version of the auction. And he took a styrofoam head, like a wig mannequin head, and he made the brass head from that.
Yeah, the riveted brass head.
It looked fantastic. Didn't look exactly the way it did in the module, but it looked creepy and cool. But then he had inset magnets where he could actually pull off the eyelids or the eyelids, and he had these really weird, almost realistic glass eyes in there. It was unsettling.
Yeah.
To represent what that thing looked like with its eyes open. It looked absolutely unsettling. It was wonderful. He had put that together. So I love those type of props. I'm absolutely a fan of them. I'm like handout king to the point that sometimes I think my players are kind of irritated, and I'm like, oh, here's another handout. They got a stack of crap, and they have to figure out. where all the hidden importances are among it all.
That is so awesome. So awesome. Yeah. And I think the final tip for setting atmosphere, setting mood at your table is for the game master to just listen to the players, because I've heard it said before that a game master cannot create horror at the table, and I totally agree. Especially
Absolutely.
because these are collaborative games. These are collaborative stories. Your players are part of the storytellers. We're all telling the stories together organically. And as a game master, especially for Call of Cthulhu, listen to your players. They will sometimes subtly give hints on what would make that scene scarier, and they don't even realize that they're telling you this. They're arming you. So again, last weekend at the con, I ran a game, and the investigators were looking for two missing boys, 10-year-old twin boys. And when they finally found them in a ghoul den, and I described the room, and I described how there was a table and there was a large haunch of meat kind of just rotting on that table. One of the players said, because I was done describing, and then one of the players said, "Oh my God, have they been eating from that haunch of meat?" And I was like, "Well, they are now." And so I was like, "Make a spot hidden." And it wasn't going to matter to me whether they made it or failed it. I was still going to tell them this. I wanted her to roll just to kind of feel like there was something going on. So she rolls her spot hidden, and thank God it was successful. And I said, "Yes, you see flecks of red around each of their mouths." And as soon as I said that, everybody at the table was like, "Oh my God." They were all grossed out, but I mean, that brought the horror, because they told me that would be scary. That would be scary if these kids are eating from that haunch of meat. And I'm like, well, they are now, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, other stuff like when they're going in the crawl space under a house, and somebody comes and is like, but there's a lot of rats in there. Like, yeah, there are now.
Yeah.
Cockroaches are there in the seedy hotel in Innsmouth, and somebody says something about like, oh God, I bet this place has bed bugs. You are guaranteed they're going to
Yes.
have bed bugs.
Exactly.
So no, you're right, because people will often voice what it is that they're hoping they don't find, and that's a good way of saying, oh, I hadn't thought about that, but I want, so now I've got that idea, but two, I know that would have that effect, because I always play with players that I know very well. I know their deep things. I know that if I want to creep up my wife, I bring up cockroaches. But when you're running a con game and you literally just met these people and you don't know those things about them, that's highly effective.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's wonderful, wonderful kind of story about how you can run a group of strangers and just absolutely read them well. So good job.
It was awesome. So much fun.
But let's then have that segue into talking about Chaosium Con, which the first Chaosium Con was just I think 2 days ago. For when we did this, 3 days ago. I don't.
Yep.
Time is meaningless to me right now.
Yes. 3 days ago.
So when we finally got to meet each other in person for the first time,
yes,
we've been talking for a couple years. And like a lot of those people, their names I might have video chat with, I might know their voice, but it was the first time we had to stand next to each other, and I didn't realize I was that much taller than
you. Yes, I am tiny.
Well, because on camera, which our listeners don't have, you're sitting in front of your computer, so we're actually, I think I'm slouching. You're actually taller than me in the side by side.
Yeah.
Let me sit up now.
Oh, very nice.
But yeah, so it was the first annual Chaosium Con, which It was cool. Hopefully we will have more in the future. I had a great time.
Oh man, I did too. It was so much fun. It was the first in-person convention I've been to in 2 years, easily more than 2 years.
My last one was Total Con, which was in beginning of 2020, and it was at that time we were beginning to hear about COVID. It was like we weren't unaware of it, but none of us had any idea what was coming. And then 2020 is going to be my big con year. I think I had like 6 or 7 that were scheduled, and almost all of them were outside my home state. So I was actually going to be traveling around a lot. And that was my first one. It was up in Massachusetts. It was great. And I was like, what a great one to start the year with. And then nothing for 2 years until Chaosium Con. So that was really weird being around that environment after so long, because it
Yeah,
was
yeah,
familiar, but it was like, "Wow, it's been a while. I hadn't realized how long it's been."
yes. It has been a while, but it was nice that it was fairly intimate. I did. I asked actually President Rick Meitz how many how many people, and he just rounded it. He says we have about 300. About 300 attendees came to ChaosiumCon. So I thought that's a really decent number, especially for a very first con.
Oh yeah,
You know,
yeah. And yeah, but the thing with a lot of the conventions like that is once they hit certain size thresholds, it only encourages more people to come, so they kind of snowball grow. But now I thought it was spectacular because there's so many people. Like we got to meet John Sumrow, so
yep.
that was great. We fanboyed over each other, so we had kind of this awkward introduction. Of he's like, "Oh my god, it's you!" And I'm like, "Oh my god, it's you!" So clearly, both of us thought the other one was a bigger deal than ourselves. So that was fun, and yeah, to see a lot of people I haven't seen in a long time. But then, like I said, meet a lot of people I knew them online or I knew of them, and finally it's just love you recognize. That you're like, oh, I finally actually get to meet them, but I know them from their picture, I know them from their online presence. So when Lynn Hardy came up and said hi, I was like, I know exactly who you are. I knew who you were from the other side of the lobby, but we've never spoken before. But
Yep.
and then others, I mean, I know their handles, and I know they're like Twitter or YouTube icons, and
Hmm.
I've never seen their face before.
Yep. Yep. Cuppy Cup of
Hmm.
Ain't Slayed Nobody was there. Mike Diamond, podcaster, he was there. I'm blanking on his podcast name right now, but it's a an actual play show. They're doing Massive Nyarlathotep right now. Dactyl Doc,
Hmm.
Dave, who does the Prospero House blog, he was there. He's actually from Detroit, so it was basically in his backyard, coming down to Ypsilani to do the con. He
That's
was
good.
he was awesome. I mean, he introduced me to Detroit style pizza, to to the coney craze, the hot
Yeah,
dog coney craze that goes on up there.
yeah. I had no idea about the popularity of conies until we went to Detroit, and then we saw like there's some really popular coney dog place that's like right next to a knockoff, and they've had some rivalry that's been going on for like decades. It's like, oh, this was a feature I never knew about this part of the country. So, no, that was cool. Got to meet just tons and tons of fans. That was absolutely wonderful, and we got to play the Yellow King,
That
which
was awesome.
in our last episode, John had mentioned he was thinking about, I'm going to bring Yellow King. I'm going to try to run it, and I was like, I'll sit in that game. Well, it actually happened, and so we had 6 players.
Yeah,
So,
which was a full boat because there were six pre-gens, and so we had yourself and your wife,
mhm.
John Sumrow, Andy, who's a friend of his and a friend of mine, but Andy's also from the same town as John. They traveled up together.
It was a long drive.
Yeah, they drove as well. I drove, but they drove and had a much longer drive than I. We had, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Cuppy Cup was in the game, and
now we have to pull up the pictures.
Yeah, we'll have to pull a picture.
So you got to unfurl the box set on that. It's a really cool setup because the sleeve that all the books are in is held together with magnets as it unfolds into the GM screen. Very clever. I was very impressed with that.
I don't know why my brain went blank on me. It was my roommate Ian McLean, artist extraordinaire, was also our sixth player. So
I could see his face in my head, but
yes,
I've told you, like, John, I'm the worst person with names. I'm terrible. And so we got to play that. So one thing that John did, and I didn't even know this was a part of the game, is he pulls out this big wooden bowl that was this kind of rough cut, creepy wooden bowl, and he pulls out these kind of plastic coin tokens that are just lemon yellow, and they have the King in Yellow Pellegrine Press version of the yellow sign, which is different than the Chaosium version of the yellow sign, which is different than my version of the yellow sign that I had in Ashes of Onyx. And it was like 100 of them, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was a freaking lot. So he handmade all those. He evidently got a ton of just plastic coins and sat there with a Sharpie and both sides.
Both sides.
Jeez,
double-sided.
200 yellow. So that explains so much about you. Have you seen the yellow signs? Like, I've seen it 200 times. And then these exact shade. So I didn't even know that they weren't supposed to like initially be together. D6, because the game is played with a single D6. So you poured all those into a bowl, and you're like, everybody grab 2 of those tokens and one of those D6. And so I just thought this, like, oh, this is really cool. They give you all this stuff. I figured the bowl was yours, but everything else looked so good. Did about a 4-hour game of that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I thought it went great. What did you think?
I have never played Gumshoe before.
Mm-hmm.
So the no rolling for skills
for your checks, investigative
checks. I was familiar with the concept. I just didn't know how many there were, because I think each of us had 6, so there were so many potential ones.
Mm-hmm.
So I also kind of thought, from like a GM's point of view, I was like, God, I'd have to keep track of which 6 each of them have, and so I always kind of like watch it from that side of like, ooh, because I like the idea of they walk in, and instead of saying who has archaeology, these people was like, okay, then you guys find this. I like the idea of the GM knows who has archaeology. It's like, okay, this is what your character finds. That way, they never know if there's one that they didn't get, because if you're like, who has history, and everybody kind of shrugs, like, okay. And there's no chance they're really going to get it. So I like the idea of it being that way. But then I was like, man, you have to keep track of all the ones that they have. It was a really cool system, that single D6 roll. Man, that thing was scary, because there's no curve. It's 1 through 6, even chance of any. And it was, you had to get like a 4 or higher.
Yep. Which means under most circumstances, you've got a 50-50 chance of being successful.
And then your certain attributes, you could kind of spend your points of your attributes. So as the game went on, I think by the end I was 0 in almost everything.
Right, which is
all the important ones are definitely 0. And the only ones that had points, it was like, I'm not ever going to use that. And
Yep.
So that really did heighten the tension for me. And the cards were weird, but it was a cool mechanic where there were you could have 3 wound cards or 3 mental wound cards, I guess you'd call them. Yep. I don't know. And they all had unique things. They all had different effects. So the other thing that Jon did is evidently the cards that he had were kind of flimsy. So he made these two large boxes of how many cards were in each of those boxes, Jon?
It varies. The amount of cards that I had were going to be too big, too many to just use one of those standard Magic the Gathering deck boxes. So they actually have these other deck boxes that are like slightly bigger. So I bought a couple of those to act as like file boxes, to hold these cards. But there were more of the mental shock cards than there were of the physical injury cards. I made sure that I had 4 copies of every card, because the nice thing about the scenario, and this is true for, as far as I'm aware, for every one of these Yellow King scenarios, is it will tell you all of the cards that would be required for that scenario. So I just made sure I had 4 copies of every card that could come up for the scenario, which that's not every card that's in the whole system, because I've got other boxes that are just filled with other cards, and those are only, I think I've only got one single copies of all those. But in preparation for this, I started printing off cards and cutting them out, and I've got a spool of double-sided tape, and I've got a whole giant of like 1,000 of those super cheap Magic the Gathering token cards, and I was just applying these Yellow King cards, whether it's shock or injury, to these tokens. I was highlighting, just with a Sharpie, getting rid of any of the Magic the Gathering, text or anything, so it wouldn't be distracting to it. And then I put everything in a card sleeve, a yellow card sleeve, because that's the color that the game assigns for mental shock, and red card sleeves for physical injury. And so, now
Well,
all the backs are uniform, and you can just, instantly
well,
see.
they were also the same shade as yellow as those dice and tokens. And you had them in these plastic carry cases, the like boxes that
We're
were say
also yellow and
the
red. Yep.
same shades. So I thought it was all built
No.
that way. And I think you handed me like one of my first cards. I was kind of like looking at it. I kind of slid it out of the sleeve. I want to see what the back of the card was. And I was like, oh wow, this was a magic card Sean made. Like I had no idea. So
Yep.
you did a fantastic job on those.
Yep. Thank you.
We did the scenario. It was set in France. I was
Yep.
a pretentious poet, and we almost succeeded.
So close.
Uh,
So close.
and then you killed us. So I think this is now the second time you've run me, and I have yet to survive a John Hook game.
Well, maybe you'll be more successful when we do get around to running the code.
Yeah, okay, so we're on
No,
episode 13. I think you promised me that in episode 1. That you were, no, we're on 14 now. 14!
Right. We're recording episode 14 right now.
Oh, yeah. One day. I understand. It's kind of like whenever I get around to like finally getting to like run that horror thing or an express box set my wife got me back in 2016, I think. So yeah, one day I'll get to it.
One day. Oh, I'm glad you had a good time. That's I'm still trying to practice and hopefully get more comfortable in running Yellow King. I think it can be a fun, really narrative horror game. I don't know if I see it as a campaign, sort of like how I don't really see Alien as a campaign, but super fun narrative, kind of cinematic play, where you don't know what's going to happen. It's highly likely and almost expected that your characters are not going to survive. So if you can eke out a survival, that's even more momentous.
So I played a couple other games. I was there. So right before that last con I did before the pandemic was the first time I ever played a convention.
Oh, wow.
when I'd done Gen Con before, my schedule with the Writers Symposium was set up just so flawlessly that I never actually had enough time to be in one of the game slots. There was a couple where I technically did, but it would be once the game was over, I would have to sprint full speed across the length of Gen Con to get back to whatever panel it was that I was supposed to be on. That was like, yeah, that's not gonna happen. So I never played a game when we went to Gen Con, and so I did my first ones right before the pandemic. This was now the second one, and one of the things which I became aware of very really early on is running a convention game is a very different skill set than running a game for your group of friends, because you also have a very set window of time. And I found it very interesting to watch the various GMs, because at the beginning we're all kind of like bopping around and taking our time, and you could kind of see them pushing it, harder and harder, trying to get to a satisfying end, whether it be a TPK or victory or whatever. Because, man, once that clock runs out, there's another group that's about to sit down at the table. So and some of them have got to run to their own events that they've got next. And that's a very, very focused skill set, because one, you have to do it in the time, but two, you don't know any of these people. You might also have to introduce the game to them. So, 4 hours, wherever the slot is, like, here's this game, here's the rules, here's your character. We're going to have an adventure in exactly this amount of time. And man, that just stresses me out thinking about it. So I'm always very impressed when I see and he would pull that off, because I'm like, wow, I don't think I could do that.
So, what did you get to play? You played Yellow King with me. What else did you get to play?
I played an old Cthulhu by Gaslight adventure. Was it? Yeah, I mean, it counts as Cthulhu by Gaslight because most of it was on a boat going back and forth to America. So we started in the UK for like the opening scene, getting the job. It was called The Scuttling, and we lived, but we also didn't win. The monster technically got the item away from us, so that was fun. I got to watch a very creative player. So in the climax of that, some sort of weird crab monster thing is huge, and then it's like 5,000 babies, and they're all deadly, emerge from the hold of the sailing ship that we're on in the middle of the Atlantic. And it is a serious fight because we're armed like most Call of Cthulhu characters that are antiquarians and whatnot, which is not armed. And when this monster comes out, and it is tough as nails, one of the players was like, "Is there one of those?" Is like, I don't know ships, but you know that thing where if you do a rope, that mast arm swings around real hard. And that was my buddy Matt McLeod, who I'm friends with. He saw his eyes light up because it was the same thing. Of like, well, there is now. And so the player or the character ran up and actually like smacked that thing very hard by having the sail arm swing around and hit it, and almost knocked it off. And he had it kind of up on its hind legs, teetering on the edge, and I and another character ran up to push it over and failed. And we ended up having to abandon that ship, and I think floated up on the shores of Greenland or something. But that was a fun game. And then I played a Western Cthulhu game, but it was not Down Darker Trails. It was a just Cthulhu Western. I think Down Darker Trails has, well, I know it has a lot more pulp elements. This was more just Call of Cthulhu, so it was like Old West. And we played that. That was actually a lot of fun. That was a very role play heavy game, and I was amazed that we were able to get that much role play in that window, because it was a full table. The GM did a fantastic job of making us feel like we were really getting a lot out of these conversations, and then we could move to the next one, and it felt natural and not rushed. I think at the end he kind of was being a little bit frantic, trying to hurry it up, because he knew that we only had about 20 minutes left at that point, so it's time for the fight. And that was a very, very fun game. So I had a good time. So I played 3 games. I played those 2, and then Yellow King. I there was only one I was actually truly successful in, and that was the Wild West one.
That's awesome. That is awesome. I did not get to be a player in anything. I game mastered everything, and so I wrote a scenario, a pulp adventure called Tomb of Doom, and I have done some play testing with it beforehand. So I was kind of comfortable. I felt comfortable and familiar with how I was going to run this. But I'll tell you, I ran it twice, and I learned a lot about it that I'm going to take it back to the drawing board. But all of the players had a great time. So, I mean, that was successful. Everyone just walked away with huge smiles, and there was lots of death and lots of monster attacks and everything. But everyone seemed to have a great time. But it helped really expose some things in that scenario that, as the writer, I'm like, oh yeah, definitely need to do this differently. So we're going to take it back to the drawing board. It's probably going to be completely unrecognizable in its current state for what I'm having in mind for what it will eventually be.
Well, this is why we
That's
play
fine.
test.
This is why we play test. Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, so I get a lot of questions from my normal viewers and whatnot about people that are wanting to publish their own adventures and whatnot. And I stress the importance of playtest. Jon, you've written how many published scenarios at this point? You're up in the 20s, I think,
Something
between
like
all the
that.
different
Yeah.
games. Yeah, and even you have I wrote this scenario. I think it's pretty good. That you see it in action, and you're like, nope, back to
Oh
the
yeah.
drawing board. And I think that's probably one of the most perfect examples of even a very experienced game writer doesn't see all of the hurdles or the weird things that actually do happen when it's thrown into the fire, and then have to go back and adjust it. So I think that I personally think it's a perfect example, because you will have somebody that's like, I know what I'm doing. I don't need to play test this, or just play test it once. Like, no, no. If John Hook still has to like go through this, then Billy, you probably should play test it a bit more.
Always, every time, there's always more to play test. Now, of course, eventually you're going to have to just kind of call it done and put it out there. But this is early enough that I can still make changes.
No, and yeah, you can never predict absolutely everything,
Mm-hmm.
and at some point you do have to stop adding before you end up with like a giant grimoire, and it's like, this is playable in 3 hours. It's 500 pages, like, because it takes into account everything. Like, no, you have to still pare it down to workable, but there are sometimes things that become glaringly obvious when they're thrown against players that just don't work. And it's very different than writing for your own group. The scenarios I could
Yeah.
write for my own group, I could do in my sleep because I know how they think. You
Mm-hmm.
have to also do, how do most people think, and it's different. So no, I think that's a wonderful example to go back to in our previous conversations we've had about writing and publishing.
Yeah. I ran Tomb of Doom twice, and then I ran something else I wrote but years ago called Of Wrath and Blood, which is actually, it was designed to be a sequel to the introductory adventure The Haunting. So when I created the pregens to use for this, I created the pregens like you would create any other, introductory character. And then after they were all made, I was like, all right, if this character survived the haunting, what kind of changes would be made to this character? And I did that. I made 8 pregens, and I did this to all 8 pregens where individually I said, what would this character, what kind of changes would have happened for this guy? And everyone got a little bit of Cthulhu Mythos, either between 3 and 5 points. A couple of them had a couple of spells. Each had a spell that they could know. A couple of them had a weird device that they had picked up, like a dagger, or and something, so they all had different things, but all of the characters had just a little bit of Cthulhu experience. So, and I had a copy of The Haunting with me, so that there were several players at the table who hadn't actually played The Haunting in the past, although
Sin.
although there were several players who have played The Haunting, and they were able to reference back to that. But I had a
Okay.
couple of brand new players, like this was their first Call of
Chaosium
Cthulhu game.
Con should just have, by law, there's always one game of the
Yeah,
haunting.
yeah, it should be
So
running in every time slot, so any new player can go and play The Haunting.
it's just at least once. This is definitely going to be my feedback letter. Like, you know what? You failed. 40th anniversary, and you didn't have the haunting. I'll try to Karen it up as much as possible in that
There
letter.
you go. Speak to their manager.
You had mentioned your sequel to haunting, and I think a lot of keepers have their own sequels that they've done,
Oh,
and they're all going to be wildly different. I think what would be really cool, and I'm not willing to take on this job. I think would be really cool would be a collection of various sequels to The Haunting. Like,
oh, that'd be hilarious. Yeah.
6 adventures, and they're just completely different ones. I think there'd also be like a cool contest, or like some sort of anthology adventure. We have some other, like, send me your sequel to The Haunting, and they'll all choose the best 6, and like we would do short story anthologies, and then in the end you publish it through Miskatonic Repository or something as this collection of wildly different ways, that because 40 years of that being the introductory scenario. Oh wow, there is
Yeah, people
hundreds,
because you can
thousands.
go in all kinds of direct. Like the impetus for my sequel is in The Haunting. There's a family that's named, as far as being, this was the last family that was living in Corbett's house before they got scared out, and the mother and father were committed to an asylum, Roxbury Asylum, and their children. It says in the original Haunting, their children, who they don't really name, they just say their children were sent to live with family in Baltimore. Well, that was the line that I zeroed in on. And I was like, okay, who are these children? Who are they living with in Baltimore? So in my sequel of Wrath and Blood, it's in Baltimore, and it focuses on these 2 children, which I name. I said, well, if you're going to have something weird and a horror story, the kids need to be weird. So they're twins, right? And so they're 10-year-old twins, and yeah, so I make it weird from there. I don't want to do any spoilers because people might enjoy it. But it's funny.
You're already looking forward to this anthology that I just made up, John. It was hypothetical.
Well,
You're going to do it.
when you said that, this scenario was written in response to a contest. So,
Really?
yeah. So in 2010, the website yogsothoth.com ran a contest, and the contest was called "And Then," right, with its stretched out E's and N's,
Good
right?
title.
And then, and so the thing was, you were supposed to write a sequel to any published scenario. Now the rule said any published scenario, and I did place, and I got a prize. I took second place, and I was awarded a prize for that. The first place winner, who I don't remember who it was, but all I remember is that they wrote a sequel not just to an adventure, but they actually wrote a sequel to a specific group of players who ran in a scenario. So it was supposed to be a sequel that was meant to take certain characters that were player characters in a different run and how they went forward. I found that weird because it wasn't actually just a published scenario. It was a certain run, like this group of players and how they played it. It's their sequel, and that's the one that took first place.
Nah.
So
Someone was sleeping with a judge.
I think so.
I say
That's all
that
right.
at every writing contest that I didn't win. That's like my
Someone was sleeping
default.
with the judge. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I
that's
know
all
I
right.
won.
I've really enjoyed of Wrath and Blood. I think it's a fun scenario and not not too lethal. In fact, I think everybody survived it in the play over the weekend. So
Well,
it went well.
I've at least pieced together. There's a ghoul cave from the previous part we've talked about. My
Yes.
sequel actually focused on the vampires. I actually had three more that were operating in Boston. Uh,
Oh, cool.
and I really got into that symbol that was introduced in the haunting, the eye that's in kind of like
Mm-hmm.
three capital Y's around it to a triangle.
Mm-hmm.
Because I always wanted to know more about that cult, so I actually had the three more that had reached that level of Corbett, and it was almost like a Dust Till Dawn sort of thing, where it was a speakeasy, and the speakeasy was below ground in what used to be their temple area, and the surface floor was like an automobile shop, and there was always like this broken down car that just sat above the trap door. And then, when they rolled the car forward and they opened it up and the people went down their fancy dress. And there was a big jazz club down there, but also down there was the room that the three things were sleeping in. And it had the blood channels across the floor that were in that eye shape. And it led to these kind of like metal tubes that were like straws that were like just right above their lips. And so they would like kill somebody. They would kind of run down the channels and slowly feed the three leaders. It was really neat. So totally different take. And
Totally
then
different. That is
uh,
awesome.
I think The Adventure of the Star on the Shore was written as a sequel to that because it actually opens with the people that did the haunting are called back to the burned down church temple because there was another room that they have discovered. And
All right.
that's what
Right.
leads them on to that. So then now it goes off to Rockport, and you're fighting giant monsters and stuff like that. So many different ways that you could
Oh,
take.
this is a good idea. We could,
Yeah,
yeah, we should.
no, not me.
Well, you've written up one, right? You wrote up. You said yours. So with the
I've
vampires.
I've got mine. I don't even know if I have anything even written down anymore. Who knows? I think I wrote it all on graph paper while I was at work, and I should have been actually working. But so I love the idea of here's six totally different takes. Your
Mm-hmm.
group can technically only do one because they're so wildly different.
Yep. So cool. Well, yeah, Chaosium Con was a blast. I've heard that they are already scheduling and planning for next year. I even
Good.
heard that they are reviewing the game schedules that they had originally kind of put out there and was available through Warhorn. So I think they're going to adjust. If what I heard is correct, they're going to adjust their schedule to allow for more games to be fit into the schedule and have more open gaming areas and have just kind of allow for later gaming to occur so that players, if they want to keep playing and later on into the night, that it will be a space available to them.
One thing though that did like sadden me with the schedule is I really wanted to play Seventh Sea,
Mm-hmm.
and there was some large game LARP thing, and that he's like, no, I want to play Seventh Sea, the role playing game, because I need to play it to really wrap my head around it. And there was a session that happened to be at the exact same time as our panel, so I didn't get to play it, and I met John Wick, and he was like, "Man, just come by. We get it." And I never had time. And also, John Wick like showed up like Batman. I was sitting at the bar. I was talking to some people, and boom, he was beside me. I didn't see him approach, and then he said a couple things. We talked for a bit. Real nice guy. Turned my head. Boom, just like Batman. And I would only see him for split seconds. So he is an extra dimensional being as far as I can tell, because everyone else I saw move, he just appears. So
Yeah, that is funny. One thing that I hope is expanded and quite frankly improved upon in the next one is the dealer room. I was really hoping that there'd be a couple of dealers that had some like vintage Chaosium material to purchase, and the only thing that had vintage stuff was the auction, the actual auction, not the role playing scenario, and actually the auction was being held during the same time that we were playing Yellow King.
Mm-hmm.
And I had arranged. There was one thing I wanted to buy, which was a box set of Ringworld, because I've actually just started recently reading the novel Ringworld, which is really awesome. It's a lot of fun. And I thought, man, I want to get the box set. There was only one in the auction, and I get it. I probably wasn't going to win it no matter what, but I had heard that I guess there was some sort of Uber collector who was in attendance to the auction. And I guess this guy bought like every box set that went up for auction. He was
Oh,
snatching them up at no matter what the price.
then Guillermo del Toro shows up.
Yeah,
It drops Hollywood money and buys all
it was
the rare stuff.
somebody was dropping bank in order to get every box set. And I'm like, man, that's awesome for the auction. But I would have, and these were pristine copies. I would have taken a slightly dinged up copy if it was just available from a vendor.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope Chaosium will invite vendors, or, say, hey, if you got stuff you want to sell, come on out to our con.
Well, yeah, first year con. So the vendors, they don't know what the actual numbers are because we can't look at historic numbers. Coming off a pandemic, another very real factor. So yeah, I wish the dealer room was bigger. I understand why, at least if those were the reasons, and those seem like very logical reasons. I tried very hard to talk Q Workshop into coming because, like, a day before Chaosium Con started is when the Q Workshop Seth Skorkowski Icons dice released, and and I made that set to be specifically for Call of Cthulhu. That and Traveler, because I had 2d6, though they aren't the same shape d6s. I wanted that, but didn't get that. And yeah, so I was like, hey guys, why don't you come to Chaosium Con? That'd be great for the release of these dice. I mean, there's like a Cthulhu theme on the box. It'd be perfect. Well, they're in Poland.
Mm-hmm.
And so they basically had the like, we would have to cross the Atlantic Ocean to go to this small con. Yeah, that's not really going to work. So I tried to get them there, but evidently it just wasn't feasible. So, oh well.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I've been milking. I've been trying to work on that for months. Say, hey, so what date are we releasing? Let's go April 6th. Like, it'd be cool. Is there just happens to be by sheer chance on I think April 7th, Chaosium Con, you should come. I'll be there. And they're like, no. Actually, first they looked into it and they came back and said no. So, oh well. Hopefully next year.
It was great. And, Ypsilani, Michigan was beautiful. I had an opportunity to kind of drive around in like their little downtown area. It was very cool, very, just old town kind of architecture, and it was just really, really neat. I liked it a lot. So it was a good location. It was fun.
The University of Michigan is just right there in Ann Arbor, and so I visited the archaeology museum they have there. They actually have a really good archaeology museum that has a lot of cool artifacts, and they actually have more artifacts than they have room for cases. So the cases have these drawers that you don't always notice. So when we were going in, the woman that was at the counter, she's like, "Don't forget to open the drawers." People never remember to open the drawers. So when you stamp the cases, you realize stuff, and there's like 4 drawers that's in it. Two layers of 2 drawers each, and they're big. And you pull it up, and it's glass, and it's full of artifacts. One of them really stuck out was a case that was full of artifacts that were fake artifacts that that people would sell bogus artifacts in Egypt and whatnot, but some of them were 300 years old. So
Oh
it's a
my god.
300-year-old fake artifact, and but then it kind of go through like how they're able to identify it because and they would have sometimes real ones next to it, and they're saying these are the subtle things we can do because me looking, I was like, yeah, I can't tell the difference of like different papyrus scrolls or little figures. So that was cool. So I actually recommend that anyone do that. If you're a keeper who does a lot of museums and archaeology, and there's a museum of archaeology just right there.
That's so funny because that goes immediately to what Belloc tells Indiana Jones when they're meeting, in Cairo, and he says, I take this watch. It's $10 on the street. I bury it in the sand for 1,000 years. It becomes priceless, And so now you have these fake artifacts. 300 years later, they're equally priceless now.
So that was a cool little one. And one thing that I would love to see at some sort of very Call of Cthulhu event, whether it be that or like Necronomicon or something, would actually be a almost like some sort of geocaching game where you
Oh,
actually
that's
have
kind of cool. Yeah.
the clues, almost like geocaches, spread around like the town or the something like that, and then people could go out and try to collect the clues, with their GPS or whatnot. So it's dropping that in the air in case anyone wants to figure out how to do that. I'd love to see it.
I like that. It's a good idea. It was really, really fun. I look forward to it next year now.
Mm-hmm. I do too.
I drove, so it was like a 14-hour drive, which wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. I mean, I queued up a couple of audiobooks and I was able to listen to these Horus Heresy novels as I'm driving, and it made the time fly. It was great. It was really great. So I would do it again. I would drive again. It was
See,
good.
drives like that, it's never the drive to the location that I find the beating. It's always the drive home. Because on the drive there, you've got, I'm looking forward to this. 2 more hours and I'm there. Oh boy! And then the drive home is the ones I was like, I don't remember this state being so wide. Why is the road longer? So my wife and I flew up several days in advance. We were up there a week, but then we spent a few days in Detroit, touring around Detroit. Went to the Edsel Ford Museum there, which was freaking huge and cool. So we did a couple little things around that area. Visited a couple of the more notable locations, like the largest Freemason lodge in North America. I think it's about 8 stories tall.
Wow.
It was, my wife said, "Hey, we should go check out this," and I was like, "Okay." And you're not really imagining how huge it now is. An event center, and evidently the event center is only like a third of it. There were like kids out front wanting to go and like see some concert. But evidently, like most of it is still abandoned and has like secret doors and all sorts of stuff. Beautiful, cool building. And then we kind of tooled around the area and we swung by Ann Arbor, spent a day there, went to that museum, and then kind of went up there and finally came home. But we flew because we're coming from a little further away.
A little bit.
And so, rented a car, drove around, saw the sights. It was a lot colder than I was hoping it would be. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that was a little surprising. It was
but no,
colder.
it was great. Got to be out of the house. I got to come home to like 500 things I've neglected to do. So I am now frantically trying to catch up with, different stuff around the house and back to my own channel and, doing this.
This is awesome. Well, Seth, I had a fantastic time. The convention was awesome. I loved getting to meet you. Loved meeting your wife. It was
It was great
great. It was great. So
and very needed.
yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Well, I want to give a shout out to our Patreons. We've acquired a few recently. So Author O'Connor, thank you. very
Thank you so
much.
much. Thank you, Arthur. I want to say thank you to Joe Collins. Appreciate your assistance and your support.
Thank you, Joe. And Ken Austin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks out to Mark Story. Appreciate your support, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. And I am going to mispronounce this, as is my superpower. Stros. It begins with an X. So
I'm sure it's a
Stros.
handle. Yeah.
Yeah, I maybe, I don't know.
Extros.
Extros, is that what it is?
I don't
I
know.
thought we had a fungi from Yugoth. I don't know. Thank you, whether you're a fungi or not.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you to Joe Todaro. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. And finally, Ken Frankovich. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. If you enjoy the show and want to support us, we would greatly appreciate your support. You can reach out to us at patreon.com/modern_mythos. Link will be in the show notes.
We also have a Discord. So we've got the link in the show notes. You can show up, chat with us, chat with the other people that are involved in that. There's a lot of different conversations that go on. Also, if you ever have any questions about anything that maybe we touched on and didn't elaborate all the way with, or have suggestions for future episodes, you can drop those there. And John and I'll kind of figure if we've got enough that we can talk about, feel like we have any knowledge on, we'd gladly take those suggestions and ideas of just different future topics. So you can show up, chat, and just be, come part of the community.
Yeah, our previous episode was completely created through conversation from Discord. So, reach out to us on Discord, please. And again, we'll have a link to our Discord and an invitation in the show notes. And Seth, you do an amazing job of also providing this show on YouTube. Our Modern Mythos YouTube channel would be nothing without you. So thank you so much for providing that.
Well, that was pretty easy since we've already got the audio track down. I mostly just add images of whatever we're talking about. So I try any game we mention, I'll try to have the cover of it up or different things like that. At this point, I've done like certain ones we keep bringing up. I've already got an image for it, so it's becoming a lot faster.
Oh, good.
The last one was a lot harder. We brought up a lot of like very obscure indie games, and I had to do that. But usually Yellow King stuff like this. Like, oh, I've already got one. We talked about that 9 episodes ago. I've already got that image ready.
We also have a Facebook page, so please like us and follow us on Facebook.
Please like us.
Just like us. Like me.
We have an RSS feed for who just wants to go ahead and have it. Our episodes go straight into their podcatcher. Is that what it's called?
Yep, podcatcher. Yep.
Okay.
You can subscribe. Use the RSS to subscribe through your favorite podcatcher. And of course, as always, we cannot do this show alone. We want to thank our amazing editors, Max Mahaffa, Edwin Nagy, for their hard work and keen skills in making us sound awesome. Thanks, guys.
I also want to thank John Sumrow, who I finally got to meet.
Yes.
Was evidently fanboying over for our badass Modern Mythos logo, which is now appearing in a Chaosium title hidden away. So thank you very much, John. Very talented artist. I follow him on Facebook. Check out his official website, and please consider joining his Patreon. Links, of course, in the show notes.
Yes. Finally, we want to thank the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets for generously allowing us to use their song Gluttony as our intro and outro music. If you are a fan of the Lovecraft's writing and the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, then you really need to check out the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets. Please check out their Bandcamp site and their official band website. Links for those are also in the show notes.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.